In the Bible, Paul explains that everyone has two bodies, a physical body and a spiritual body. Mediums use their spiritual bodies when they act as a communication bridge between the physical and spirit worlds. As a spirit speaks, mediums hear the information using the ears of their spiritual bodies, then repeat the information to other physical people. Mediumship is synonymous with the biblical term gifts of the Spirit. The focus of our show, Making Known the Unknown, is to provide knowledge through the use of Reverend Hewitt's mediumship and Sidney Schwartz's research. The Bible contains the history of psychic events, along with man-made doctrines created by priests centuries ago. This show will explore the untruths which the Bible entrenched into our society. By uncovering these untruths, we encourage people everywhere to think for themselves with a critical mind.
Hello, and welcome to Making Known the Unknown. I'm your host, Tina Tarryk, and with me is my guest, Reverend Carl Hewitt. Carl is the pastor and founder of Gifts of the Spirit Church in Chesterfield, Connecticut, and Carl is also a medium. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
For those of you viewers out there who normally see three people here, that third person is on hiatus right now, and that's Sidney Schwartz, who is a middle school teacher in Hackensack, New Jersey, and a Bible researcher of upwards of 25 plus years. And we are missing his absence tonight on the show, but he will rejoin us shortly in the next program. Okay.
Yeah.
With that, I'd like to say hello to our viewers. The title for tonight's show is called The Vatican. No, we're not going to let you off the hook. We're going to get into some sort of heavy stuff, basically information that most of you can actually find out on your own by just going on to the website or the internet. And we are happy to put this information together and share it with all of you, and once again ask you to think for yourself. And if what you're about to hear makes sense to you or not. Okay. With that, let's start the show. I like to do something called current events first, because there's just so much around us that's happening every day that is great fodder to discuss on this show. And one of the first things that actually hits pretty close to home, and when I share these stories, I'm going to turn them over to Carl to see what he thinks is really going on in these situations. And then you, the viewer, can think for yourself and see what you decide and what you think is going on. The first that I've wanted to talk about for some time now is this place called God's House, which is in Moosup, and I'm sure some of you have seen seen what's been going on television with this particular group of people. And of course, this is how it piques my curiosity. And then I say to myself, you know, we should share that with our viewers and ask Carl what's going on. So here we go. Evidently, a gentleman who lived there, who had to go into a convalescent home, allowed some other people to live there who had formed a religion, or it seems like something like that, and referring to it as God's house. And I guess they really mean it. They really believe that this house is the house of God. And evidently this man needed money while he was in the convalescent home and decided to evict these people. And I'm really trying to synopsize this story. And these people, I guess, had some difficulty in leaving and wouldn't remove themselves from the premises because their belief, and I'm going to quote here, and if their belief is that a palace is going to be built in this particular location instead of the house that's there, and that God is going to take care of them, and God will have mercy on all of us. And I believed this was said by the people as they were being taken out of the house, as if to warn the rest of us that we really don't know what's coming, and they have, I guess, some information that we don't. Without dragging this out any longer, I'm going to ask Carl what he thinks of that story.
Well, first of all, let me go back to something that a lot of your viewers are not familiar with, Tina, and that is how did this picture come about? And the message on the front picture down here, how did that ever come about? Well, that message came to me through one of the gifts of the Spirit, as well as this one. No human hands touched that picture, touched that painting. It was enlarged from a 3x5 picture, but in order to prove it to me that who he was, he had Judas come into the picture. This young man right here died in the fall of 1950 at in the Korean War. He was an artist when he was on the earth plane, and he did the painting at this seance to prove to me that who he was, because he had been talking to me for a long time, and every time I asked him, "Who are you?" and he said, I'm not important. The name is not important," which I had trouble dealing with that when I found out who he was. And then I went back and I got this message that I received in the same kind of a gift that this came in. This is called precipitated art. This is called precipitated messages right here.
Okay.
And when this came through in 1982, well, I said to myself, that's very unusual, very unusual. I don't know, I know what it means, but I don't know what it means. And from that time on until this period, there was a constant communication with me, just like if you open the Bible, and the Bible, and in the Bible it will say, and the voice of the Lord came to me and said this, this, or this. You see?
Right.
Well, it was then that I started thinking, because I had been told a long time ago when I was a child that what was happening to me then is all through the book. Well, I had trouble dealing with that because coming from a Baptist family and my father thinking that everything he couldn't see, touch, taste, or smell was work of the devil. So I had a lot of problems with this. So when he came through and telling me things, he said to me that the religions on your planet do not teach what he taught. He said he taught his 12 students, taught them how to develop to be a medium, a prophet in his day. And only 3 of them, Peter, James, and John, developed to be that. And because I grabbed a book and started studying about them, and I found it to be true. So you are mentioning something in the current times dealing with this house. Well, my comment on that, from the things that he told me, is the fact that this man, whoever he is, simply has what I term a pregnant ego. And he's got some pipe dreams there of somebody building a mansion there. I'm sure it's not going to come out of thin air, and that type of thing, and making all these promises. You see, if this man would appear to people, the masses of people, which I wondered why he didn't, and I will tell you in a moment what he said when I asked that question. If he would appear to the people and tell them that he taught the gifts of the Spirit, and that's all he taught, the gifts of the Spirit. And when this rich widow gave him the upper room of her business, her husband had died now, and offered that room, and he and the students cleaned it up, and that was their meeting room, and every evening, approximately 7 o'clock, they would gather there every evening. There was no evenings that were left out. And that's what he taught, the gifts of the Spirit. So this happened through one of the gifts of the Spirit. This happened through one of the gifts of the Spirit. And I have had hundreds of people come to the seances that I have attended and had other mediums come. I am not that kind of a medium. I'm not that kind of a medium. There's other mediums, few others on the planet, that have this gift. And there's another one that I have been sharing with one of my students is visiting me here from the South, and that is the one on independent voice. Independent voice is when a medium, for instance, if you had the gift of independent voice, you could sit right where you're sitting with these cameras going, the microphone on, you would go into a trance state, And everybody, I don't care if this hall was big enough to hold 5,000 people, the person furthest away from the cameras, furthest away from this set, they would hear that at the same volume, yet there is no PA system being used. I played one of the tapes of a woman that has passed on. She's been dead. She's been gone 146 years when she did this tape. And it's the first time she ever did it. You could hear her voice saying, "I didn't think this was possible." And she kept asking, "Can you hear my voice?" But she could only create the voice in the presence of this man who had that gift of independent voice, you see? This is the gift that Moses had and others. Because there's one place in the Bible, I can't remember right now, if Sidney was here, he would certainly correct me on this. This is where, and everybody heard the voice, but they didn't see anyone that said the words, you see? And they said it came from the sky, it came from everywhere. You see, it came from someone that had passed on into the other dimension, because every one of us, I don't care who we are, whether you have a belief system, where you even sleep at a church or not. When you die, you go to a higher dimension, another dimension, and there are different levels of dimensions up to where the ascended masters go. This is why there's been such a mistake when people think that God is up here. It was the spirit people who elevate themselves through knowledge that go to the higher dimensions, not a home in the sky. There's no such thing. The church created that.
So now when you talk about the voices, you talk about, for example, one of the types of gifts a medium can have is independent voice.
Right.
A lot of people would say, well, isn't that the voice of God? Didn't God have some play or say in all of these things that have been created here?
I would tell them what he told me and what I've been told all my life. God is within. Explain to me where the soul was in the body. It's right behind the breastbone. It's like a computer. You cannot destroy the soul. It cannot be burned. It cannot be exploded. It cannot be killed. It's a forever entity. And when a person dies, the moment that the heart stops, it gives birth to the spirit body, and the spirit body is a body of energy. And everybody, even if a person is 100 years old, their new body looks only about 30, never over 30 years old. And they live in that dimension, whatever dimension they planned. For instance, musicians go to the level of musicians, and the artists go to wherever the artists go. It depends on how you live here. If you're a bad person here, you go to a level where only bad people go. You don't get mixed like you do on the planet here. You go to the place that you prepare yourself. You're a good person, you go to where all the other good people go. And there is no such thing as a home up there in the sky. There is no such thing. And that's where my father had trouble with this little boy, his son, which was myself, of course. And so I stake my life on what I'm teaching now. I am not teaching something that I read in a book or somebody else told me. They told me, those on the higher dimensions of life, and they said that your world has now, this was when they told me, this was about 8-9 years ago, they told me that there are 12,000 different religions on this planet, and what you're saying, this person here is trying to make it 12,001.
Well, it would seem to me that they're referring to this home, which looks like a residential home, as God's house. And many, many times, I think we've all heard the term God's house referring to just about any church that's out there.
Any church that's out there you can call God's house.
So as much as the media may be poking fun at these people, or maybe perhaps they're already taking care of that for themselves, we could go down the street from this place and find many churches that are more well established that also refer to themselves as God's houses. So what I'm getting at is there really any difference?
Tina, if you go in and stood in front of a mirror, look at yourself in the mirror, You're looking at the temple of a living God. God is within all of us. I don't care who we are. If we're black, white, Jew, Gentile, bond or free, God is within all of us. This is the way we were created in the beginning. It was the church that created all of this. It was the church that separated man from the real God. The real God is within. So when I do my prayers, of course he taught me this, when I do my prayers, I put my hand right over this because that's where the soul is. I say, Lord God of my being, unto the Father within, come forward this moment, this hour, and bring forth the Christ that is within me, and release the enzymes from my brain into my bloodstream, that my body, your temple, be healed. That is the proper way to pray. These people, including the people you're referring to in the house of God, they're looking outside of themselves for God. That is not where God is. If everybody on the planet would turn within, there would be peace on this planet. And that war and the things that are going to be happening here on this planet is all created by religion. Every bit of it is created by religion. And if the people that's watching this program and they don't believe it, all I say to you is you wait and see. In the few months ahead of us, well, you haven't seen anything yet. 9/11 was just it was a preview of coming attractions that no one in this country would ever dream about. None of them whatsoever. I don't care how brilliant they were, they couldn't dream up these things. Who would have ever dreamed that they would take the airplanes and fly them into that building? And my question was, right after that, I asked, where was God? Where was the God up there that everybody prays to? If everybody had turned within themselves and found God within themselves, it would never have happened. Never. Sorry, I got carried away there.
No, that's fine. I have quite a few questions to ask as a result of that, but I'm going to try to stay on course here. And there was another piece that I picked up from the New York Times that has to do with a monument in the Flushing Meadows, Corona Park section of Queens. And the monument was dedicated in the World's Fair in 1965 by Pope Paul VI during his visit there. And what has happened is, I guess, a woman by the name of Veronica Lucan, who has passed away, is no longer with us, began to believe that she had great visions of things that were going to come, apocalyptic things, nuclear war, earthquakes, comets acting as a ball of redemption. And these things would come killing billions of people who were rife with sin, is what I'm reading here. And the examples of this, the group that is now a following of hers called Lucanites, which sounds to me like another religion, say that these sins include pornography, homosexuality, the wearing of slacks by women. I have issue with that. Abortion and rock music. And God specifically chose to appear in New York City, this says, because it is an especially sinful place. So, another religion?
Another religion. Now, somebody's not telling the people the truth. I went to the Vatican one time. It was 1968. I never forget what happened. And of course, I'm just like all the other tourists. I was nosy and I went everywhere. But when I came to this part where the people were kissing the toe of what they thought was Jesus, as I was standing there watching what was going on, I noticed the toe was almost kissed off. I mean,
Really?
that sounds funny, but there wasn't much of the big toe left there. And the people lined up kissing the toe of this statue. And told me, a clear voice, nobody else heard it, but some of the people looked at me kind of strange right after I got the message. They said, that is the statue of Jupiter. That is not the statue of Jesus. It's no, I'm sorry, that's not the statue of Peter. That's the statue of Jupiter.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so I checked that on the web, and that was somebody they worshipped way back before Christianity, Jupiter.
Jupiter.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so they kissed his toe off.
Isn't that something from mythology?
I guess so. I don't know.
And it's at the Vatican.
Yeah.
And they think it's Peter.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do remember saying this to two men that were there, and I'm not sure if it was priest or not, but I think it was. And I said, why don't these guys tell these people the truth? They come here and they line up to kiss the toe of this statue. And I said, it's the statue of Jupiter. And one of these men says, why mess up their faith?
You know, I want to go down the path more of the Vatican, but there are just a few other juicy things I wanted to ask
All
you
right.
about first.
Let's get into your juicy
if that's
things.
okay. The first thing, and I just, you know, these articles and these stories just jump right out at me, and I can't resist but ask about them. And the next one, as I'm thumbing through this, has to do with the Pope dying. I mean, obviously, it's not something that's a secret. We've seen this feeble old man going from country to country to country, and you're wondering how he's making it and how he's going to last. But I guess one of the European cardinals was quoted, again in the New York Times, as admitting that they're no longer going to, what's the word, mince words, and they're actually admitting to the fact that the Pope is dying.
Well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. Naturally, he's going to die. All of us are going to die eventually.
I'm taking this is going to happen soon, and what I'm getting at is, do you think, in your opinion,
No,
that
he's
there
not
will
going
be-
to ascend.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to ask that.
Okay, all right.
But I bet some people think that he would. I'm sure he's probably the closest thing to God that there is in most people's minds. Of course, if there isn't God, then where does that leave them? But that's another story. So if and when he does die, do you see things happening, changing from the way that things have been happening with the Catholic Church?
No,
You don't?
no,
Uh-huh.
no.
Not with all the
The Cardinals,
lawsuits and everything going on?
The Cardinals run the Catholic Church.
Okay. All right. So that's going to stay right and tight, and they're going to stay right
Oh,
on course.
absolutely.
Okay.
Their banking system and
All right.
everything will stay the same.
Because this would be an opportune time for them to become a little more open-minded, I suppose, if they
Oh,
if
no, they
would.
won't become more open-minded.
Okay.
There'll be a few people at watching these shows that will do some thinking and realize that all religions are franchises, every one of them.
Right. Okay. There's also there's becoming, and the reason I said this too is looks like there's becoming a schism in the church, because as some people may or may not realize, recently a gay man was ordinated in the state of New Hampshire as a bishop. The church is not happy with that.
Isn't that too bad?
And they kind of got together and pretty much said, unless you were going to sign an agreement, and I'm trying to see here what the agreement is referring to, that you are against homosexuals in the clergy, then you cannot be part of this American Anglican Council. I guess they are trying to say essentially, if you're pro-homosexuality, stay over there, and if not, come with us, because we want you. And it's very interesting, because a lot of the people here seem to think that this could be what could be known as the beginning of the end of the Catholic Church.
It could be.
And I want to throw that out to you, too.
It could be, but the one thing that I like to want to get across is this. If the people, we're going way back before the Bible was put together, if the people today and since then would have listened to the prophets, gifted people, because a gifted person, such as the person I told you about, independent voice, such as this gift here, many of the others, if they had have gone and sit in the presence of this to hear those from the other dimension speak to us just as they did in order for the Bible to come about. You understand?
Right.
There would be none of this nonsense going on. People would understand that the soul, in many cases, and the soul of a woman comes back in a man's body. All over this world, there is no place on the planet that this does not exist. Every place on the planet, every hamlet, every island, every continent, there are women sitting in men's bodies. There are men sitting in women's bodies. This causes what is known as homosexuality. You can see there are certain women, they're very masculine, and they do and love to do things that they used to do when they were a man. That is the soul, because the soul has soul memory. And a person that is able to do certain things on this planet, and people say, boy, that person has the knack of doing whatever that is recorded in the soul, and it comes forward in the physical body. So these men, a man that is attracted to another man is simply a man who has a female soul in his body. And a woman that is attracted to another woman has a male soul in the body. I asked this question to him and to others, entities that have talked to me, and they gave me all of the data all the way, and this is why I and some of my students went to Turkey, and we investigated, and exactly the places they showed me in a vision, it was just like having a motion picture of it. You can talk to Sidney, he'll tell you. He was right there. He was blown away because I had described what I was seeing. And we got there, and it was right in front of him, and he took pictures, movies of this whole thing. I think one of the shows he showed some pictures.
We have done that. Can you tell some of our viewers who I'm sure this is new to, a little bit about what it was you were told when you were going to go there, what you were going to find, and how that sort of started the ball rolling with this notion of crossovers?
There's crossovers. Well, they told me that going way back, 12,000 years ago, something like that, that the people at that time, the priests, were ignorant. They were very, very ignorant. And they all thought that God was only a man, and that any woman, regardless of who she was, she did not have God in her. She didn't have a soul in her. And so they passed a law that any woman who had a child, if it was a girl child, that at 4 years old, 3 or 4, I think it was 4 years old, at the birthday of 4, that the parents have to take the little girl to the priest. And the priest would take the child into the cave where there would be a natural flow of water coming out of the wall of the cave into a basin that was hewn out of the stone, and naturally cold water, probably 54 degrees. And that little child, they took a marble phallus, it would stretch its vagina, and a lot of these little children, little babies I call them, a lot of them bled to death. But the reason they're bringing the cold water, and they think the cold water will stop the bleeding, but it didn't in many cases. And so many of these children died. And right outside of the cave, there was always a platform made there for the mothers to pray. And the mothers were there praying that their child would not die from what they had to go through. And these priests passed a law. It was a law of the church then that they had to do this, so the mothers would have to deal with this too. And so after this child was penetrated with that marble phallus, then the 3 priests, the older one and 2 younger ones, would also have sex with this child. And the poor thing was probably screaming her head off. And if she didn't die from this horrible treatment, then she was free on the street for any man to molest that child. Because before leaving that cave, they put a little gold ring right there in the left ear. It was like made out of gold wire. And if a bunch of soldiers went by and they saw this little girl with her mother, she's only now 4 or 5 years old, if she had that ring there, they would take that child away from the mother and go off in the bushes, and they raped that child, one after another. And this is how it started. So when this young woman would die, when she would die, she would have a feeling, a thought before dying, and then after dying, that she wished she could come back as a male. And she would never be, she could do anything she wanted to do, and she would never be treated this way. And when she set that thought into motion, because the soul is where thoughts are recorded. Okay. And so when this child came back into the world, she came back as a male.
Okay.
But the soul, the soul that chose the body was a female. That female. And so here is a male boy, a male coming into the world. Parents probably notice that this little boy is very feminine. He can't help it because the soul is feminine. The soul is a female soul.
So now let me just clarify this. You were shown these
Yes.
visions.
Yes.
Told where to go.
Yes.
You went there.
Yes.
And did the locals know about this place?
Now they do.
Now they do.
Because we hired a guide, and he'd never heard of such a place. And I was very careful what I said because I was afraid that he would reject us because we're coming in that country
Right.
and blaming them,
Right.
his ancestors, for
Right.
doing all of this.
Right.
He was totally
Right.
shocked.
Right.
And he'd never been there before, yet he knew all about that country.
Now, I'm betting that during that time, that was an acceptable practice
It
or
was.
procedure. I mean, there was a viewing station for the mothers.
Yes.
It didn't sound like they were fighting with the priests to take their daughters away from
They
them.
weren't fighting because it was a law of the church.
Oh, okay.
It was God's law, as I would
Oh,
say.
okay.
Law of the church.
Well, that's pretty scary.
You bet it is.
So
this
they-
is why
okay.
this is why this program. I agreed to come on this program because I want people to listen, to open their mind and think for themselves. Because this great person here, he told me to remind the people that they have a brain, they have a mind, and use it. Because on this planet, there's 12,000 religions, possibly 12,001 now with that other thing, and that people do not. They're all followers. There are very few leaders on this planet, and if you go into a leader's mind, he's not involved with a religion at all.
Very interesting.
Religions are all man-made. There is no God up there. God is here within. That's all there is to it. We can never die. The physical body will die, but the soul itself, the other body, cannot die. So if you go into Corinthians chapter 15, I believe it is, Jesus is telling us through the medium, Saul, they call him Paul now in the church, that we're born with two bodies. We're born with a physical body, we're born with a spiritual body. And if that be the case, you and I are in our physical bodies right now, we're using it. But the day will come that we will die, and that death will give birth to the spirit body, and we will be in another dimension, in a spirit body. So these are the spirit people. He's in spirit, but I really feel he's turned his back on this planet because of the ignorance that runs rampant, really.
Just to tie up with this, with the crossover piece, little girls, after a while, I can understand them not wanting to be little girls because of this,
Exactly.
this lifestyle.
Exactly.
And then wishing so hard, and I'm sure this didn't happen right away.
No.
Might have taken a few hundred years maybe
Few
to
hundred
come
years.
back as males.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is that the church and the priests started this whole process.
That's right.
They started it. Yet they're the first now to condemn it, which is very interesting.
Very much so.
But I bet if they understood their ancient history and they watched the show, did some research on their own, if they could do that and open their minds and do that, they might find something out very shocking.
This book, as I told you, came about because a young man came to me with a gun in his pocket, and he was going to kill himself that afternoon because coming to me was the last resort because he found out he was gay. And when the entity came through me, when I was in trance and told him told him the whole story about crossovers. He changed his mind, left the gun in my office, and he left. He's been in touch with me a couple of times. This was about 8 years ago. Several times since then. He lives out in Denver, I believe it is right now. He's very happy. He has a companion with him. He accepted the fact that he was gay and that his soul was a female soul.
And Carl, you saved his life.
Yes.
It sounds like you saved his life.
He told me that, 2 letters.
How could anyone be chastising or putting down someone who's a medium when all I've ever witnessed you do were good things to help people?
I've done my best to help people.
You had mentioned to me that some of the people who watch these shows have been calling you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something sort of interesting about what they used to think about the Bible, now what they're doing with the Bible. I don't know if you wanted to go into some detail about that.
They're reading the Bible now, and they're finding things in the Bible that, because most of these people I'm talking about have never read the Bible because their church would not allow them to read the Bible, you see? So now they're reading the Bible, and they're finding out that what we talk about on this program is in that book. And we can, I mean, this is a big statement, people, but I can prove what I preach. I hate that word preaching, too.
See, I find that that's a very unique combination because I think what we see most in the world is you've got very separate schools of thought.
Absolutely.
You have scientists, you have researchers, you have politicians, you have religious leaders, but you don't see them working together. It's almost like if it doesn't fall within their path or their scope, then it doesn't exist and they can't see outside of it. And I think what's so fascinating about meeting you and Sidney Schwartz is that you combine science and research and something spiritual to come up with so many answers to so many things that can help so many people.
You said something on this one of the programs one time because I was watching, it was a rainy weekend and I didn't feel too good. And I was watching one of the programs because I very seldom have a chance to watch it, but I was watching one of the programs that was done right here in the studio. And you said, you made a statement saying that, that you have found things in the Bible, that you found things that we said coming from the Bible that you've never heard in any church. And I know, and there's several people call me and mentioned that you had brought that to the surface too, see? That what we talked about, you've never heard it. It was surprising to you. And did you know some of those people that called me, they didn't know it was in the Bible either.
Right. Interesting. What you're allowed to see and what you're not allowed to see.
Most of the theologians, they'll go around all of this stuff. They won't touch anything dealing with the word of dealing with spiritual things.
Interesting.
And yet Jesus says we're born with 2 bodies. We're born with a physical body, we're born with a spiritual body. When it comes to anything spiritual, they won't touch it with a 10-foot pole because they don't want to lose their following. You get my point?
Well, speaking of that point, there's, as long as this lasts and as long as I have the data to support this, I'm going to start a regular section on this show, and it's called Sins Are Profitable. And what I'm going to read from, and I'm telling you folks, this falls into my lap, and I have to share it with you. I'm compelled to. And this will tie in with a topic of our show tonight as well. Very interesting. And this has to do with the Vatican Bank. And I'm going to read to you this research that had been done. I'm only going to read this one particular item tonight, and I'll save all these juicy tidbits for other shows. This one is referring to the Vatican Bank, which is the Institute for Religious Works. And I'm letting you viewers know, in case you didn't know this, they agreed to pay $250 million to the creditors of Banco Ambrosiano. Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the Pope's banker, was accused of being an accessory to the fraudulent bankruptcy of the bank, which collapsed in 1982 amidst mysterious deaths. In 1988, an Italian court annulled a warrant for the arrest of Marcinkus, who had been given sanctuary at the Vatican, saying Italy had no jurisdictions over Vatican affairs. This was published in the Los Angeles Times, March 10, 1989. So that any of you who want to look this up, you're more than welcome to. Well, guess what? I was doing a little research myself recently, and evidently there is a court case right now in the U.S. District Court of San Francisco where some 300 people have band together, and what they are trying to do is they are trying to reclaim some items from them that were stolen during World War II and that evidently the Vatican had something to do with, or the Vatican was instrumental in doing something with these stolen assets. The case is called Alperin versus the Vatican Bank. It was just opened last summer. I find this interesting. And the person at that time, who was the head of the Vatican Bank, Paul Marcinkus, is now living in the United States, in Arizona. And evidently he preaches there at a local church, which is interesting.
It's in Sun City, Arizona.
Sun City. See, now I didn't say that to Carl, and he knew that. And what's interesting is...
Excuse me, somebody's talking to me.
Ah, thank you. Good. And the interesting piece now is that this person who would have knowledge of this entire time span between 1971 and 1989, because he was the, I guess his title was the president of the bank, is claiming through the Vatican immunity, although he's living in the United States. And I find that very interesting. So what I wanted to do was to just dive in a little bit about some of the Vatican's history, which is actually very seedy, it turns out, and maybe ask Carl to add some of his thoughts that he feels comfortable sharing with us, and then just kind of let it go from there. Okay, Carl.
I don't know where to start.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Do you think that the Vatican had anything to do with stolen assets during World War II? Are you comfortable to share any of that with us?
Well, for an organization as large as that, if somebody came along and wanted to say, I want to donate this to the church, they're not going to ask any questions if the thing is, if the article is valuable.
Okay, all right.
But going back about somewhere in the late 70s or early 80s, when I was doing remote viewing, they wanted to take me, and they did. They took me, I'm talking about the Ascended Masters, they took me in the basement. I call it the basement. It is the lower level of the Vatican, and there they have these different rooms, like chambers. They're actually like vaults in a bank, and it's all climate controlled and everything. And I saw the most beautiful paintings that were taken from the Jews, priceless paintings in these places. And this is forbidden territory for anybody except the cardinals there.
So now perhaps these things were donated to the church?
I don't think so.
Okay, would these have been maybe by Nazi sympathizers? Is that what we're talking about here? Possibly?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
okay.
I haven't gone into it that far.
All right.
But what I saw was enough for me. I didn't want to go any further.
Certainly there's a strong enough case now for some, I think it's 300 families, not even 300 people, who are bringing suit. And I believe that a whole bunch of other things are going to open up, as well as the missing money, the $250 million. According to this person who actually went and interviewed Mr. Marcinkus last year in Arizona, it's interesting that he enjoys what is known as sovereign immunity, and that the sovereign immunity was actually set up, I found this out, as a result of a pact signed between Pope Pius XII and Benito Mussolini in 1929.
Benito Mussolini was that son of a gun that was running the country there during World War II. And when they killed him, they hung him on the lamppost.
Now,
that's how much he was hated.
Wouldn't that seem a little strange that the Catholic Church would get into bed, so to speak, with Benito Mussolini? That really doesn't sound very good.
Spirit told me something else here. I'm trying to keep my tongue in my mouth tonight. But Spirit told me here that at the end of World War II, as it was coming to an end, that there was a lot of the Nazis, the bad ones, were dressed as priests and were put on cruise ships and went to South America. And many of them are still alive today. And they went there with their families.
Interesting. Now, according to this article, too, that there are still some people hiding out.
Oh, yeah. There's
In
a
the
lot of them
Vatican.
hiding in Brazil.
And he's one of the first ones that actually left there and came to the United States. And now the United States wants him to testify.
When I was down in Brazil in March, there was a certain person that was driving the taxi for us who spoke very good English, and I mentioned something that was on a map here, a little hamlet-like, and he says they're all of the Germans are living there. All of the people there are Germans, you see. And he said they came over here at the end of World War II. He didn't have to say any more to me.
Interesting. Okay, so they were also showing in this article that supposedly there were suicides associated with some of these mishandlings of this money.
Yeah.
And then since then, that had been put to rest, that they were suicides and of these people. One was a banker, and one was the chairman of the bank of the Vatican, interestingly enough. And since then, these cases have also been overturned, show that they were in fact homicides.
Homicide.
I find that interesting. There's also something that I had learned not too long ago, and that was about a young reporter at the time by the name of Jessica Savage,
I knew her.
who was also who also died in what appeared to be a car accident, but in fact, you tell me she was murdered.
She did not die in that accident. She died at Chez Odette's, a French restaurant in New Hope, Pennsylvania. It was one of my favorite places. I went down there that weekend after she died. There was no way she could have died the way they said she died.
Yeah, she literally supposedly drove into the Erie Canal, or one of the, that did sound strange.
There's a little canal right along by the parking lot.
Right.
And when supposedly her car went in, she was poisoned by something in the car. She got inside, the windows were up and everything else, and she and her friend died in the car within a matter of a few seconds. Mm. And then her car rolled in this ditch, and the water didn't even cover the full tires, the wheels in the front.
Right.
It was just water there. They tried to say she drowned.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
It's a big cover-up.
Now, this gentleman who's bringing this court case to light is hoping that because of the lawsuits, sex scandals, and cover-ups and federal racketeering charges leading to a case of corruption, that the whole immunity issue will go away. And then this person, Marcinkus, who is the key, will have to spill his guts and have to share what he saw and what happened.
I hope that it's possible that they bring this far, but I have a strong feeling right now that there'll be too many people disappearing before that.
Really? So we're talking about a life and death situation here because of the Catholic Church's fear about the truth coming out. Scary, isn't it, folks? It really is.
This business about the sex molestation, that's only what's already happened. That's only a drop in a bucket compared to what it's going to be pretty soon.
Okay.
There's a lot of talk behind the scenes right now of people, of men that would never have the guts to say anything about this. And as they look back, their life has been ruined because they were not born as crossovers, but their life was ruined, and many of them have decided they haven't done very much with their life because they've been living in this so-called sin. Hmm. And when somebody that wears a collar that is supposed to be a man of God tells a young boy that what you did, that was a sin, and that's a sin, and that's a sin, and that's a sin, and the only way you could get rid of that The only way you can get rid of it, you have to get rid of it through your semen. And the semen you cannot get rid of it through masturbation. And it has to be done through fellatio. I was told by some of the higher authorities in the other dimension exactly.
Now, a lot of this is also going to be in your new book that's
Absolutely.
coming out, and the book is entitled Crossovers.
Crossovers.
And hopefully that'll open up a few eyes.
I hope to God it does.
Hopefully it does. There was one other piece that I remembered reading, and that had to do with Mother Teresa before she passed. And I'm wondering, after I say this, if you could shed some light on this. Evidently, she called together several bishops and religious leaders of the world around her, and she sat them all down. And this was interesting that it was before she died, right before she died. And she expressed her disappointment with all of them and how they have not lived up to what Jesus had intended them to do.
Absolutely.
Is that true? Do you
Yes.
think that's true?
She was a great medium.
Really?
Absolutely a great medium. Just like Mary Baker Eddy was a great medium too. The one that that founded the Christian Science Church.
Okay.
She was a fabulous medium. She was a healer, and she had the gift of clairvoyance, clairaudience, and healing. And she married 4 times, and the last person she married was Eddie. She carried the name of a 3rd husband, so it's Mary Baker Eddy.
Okay.
And she was a fabulous. I did a lecture down at the submarine base one time back in the 60s or 70s. I remember the officers' wives, they had invited me down, and all their husbands were out at sea and, maneuvers. And when I got to talking about the subject, mediumship and other people that were famous mediums in the past, when I mentioned Mary Baker Eddy, I never felt so much negative energy in that room. It was like everybody in that room wanted to pick up a chair and throw it at me. And and then somebody told me from Spirit to tell them to go down to the library in Groton and into a certain section. I'm not sure, Sidney knows because he's a librarian. And I said, mark this down, go down and look in this particular section, and there they got it. Mary Baker Eddy, one great medium of this world. They came back. It's like puppies with their tail up between their legs. They came back when they found, and they were shocked. Yet they belonged to that church, but they were shocked that she was a medium.
This is the Christian Scientist?
Christian Science, yes.
Christian Science Church.
Yes.
And the Christian Science Monitor?
Yes.
Is that their
Absolutely. That's
their newsletter?
That's
okay.
their newspaper.
I'd like to do a show where we could really get into more detail about what she was capable of.
We have a lot in my office.
Okay, okay.
A lot of it.
All right, good.
I wouldn't be telling something like this if it wasn't true. When I tell the people that God is within, that's what He told me, and all the rest of them have told me. And that's what He said in the Bible, and it's in the Bible too. Right now I can't quote it because, my computer is not here.
Right.
And He says, to find the kingdom of God, look within yourself. It's so simple. And people should pray to the God within them, not to some imaginary God out there in the sky. I had another thing too. They told me that the cathedrals they used to make, the higher the cathedral, the closer to the feet of God
Really?
would the roof be. And I went to Europe to check out some of these cathedrals,
Yeah.
and there were some cathedrals that are 35 stories high. And they told me how many men fell off the scaffolds and died, and they were dragged out, just like an old dirty rag or something, and put in a mammoth hole out here in a what do you call it, the grave? Just threw them in a hole, and they were covered up with lime and dirt.
Why did they fall from the church?
They fell off the scaffolding. They were building the
Oh,
church.
they were building the church.
Yeah, these are the builders. Builders, sure.
So they
And
really
one would
gave
fall
themselves
off,
to God,
Nobody
didn't
would
they?
try to go help them. There was a group of other men. That was their job. Drag that one person, throw them in the hole. Nobody ever gives us any thought.
You know, I know only maybe children that would still believe something like that, but a grown adult would think that that has to do with touching God's feet. I think that's silly.
But the church that we went to, the cathedral we went to, and there was this archway like this, beautiful archway, and it was all the way around it were little baby skulls.
Oh, gosh.
Baby skulls. And Spirit told me that back at that time that they would tell all young couples that were getting married that unless their child was baptized, that that child's skull would add to the road to hell. In other words, if they're not baptized. And they put these skulls there like that to scare all the young couples and say that these are baby skulls that were not baptized.
Well, you know what? In another show, we are going to talk about that, and we're going to get pictures because you have them.
We have pictures of that, too.
Of that location.
But
Interestingly enough that you got.
The people will be shocked when they find out where the skulls came from of the babies.
Yes, they will.
They were there.
We have just a few minutes left, and there is something that I wanted to ask you about, if you feel comfortable with sharing, because you've shared this with me, but you don't need to go into detail. And it has to do with something that you might have seen recently with remote viewing. Did you want to share that with our viewers at this time?
I'm going to do it this way. I have a very, very strong feeling that something massive is going to happen at the end of our year, in and around before Christmas, going all the way through after Christmas. And it's a terrible, terrible feeling that, and I hope it doesn't happen. I'm going to pray till I'm blue in the face that it doesn't happen. But it's all created by the leader of the terrorist group. And I could go so far as to say this. He recently purchased, and you can check this out through Lloyd's of London, he recently purchased 25 ships, not yachts, ships. And underneath the deck of those ships are rocket launchers. And I won't go any further than that.
Okay.
But they're going to be used on the high seas.
Okay. Against other people
Against
in the
other
water.
people, Americans especially.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that couldn't have been easy.
Very, very frightening to me.
Thank you
You
for
pushed
sharing.
me to say this. I didn't want to reveal this, but I did.
I'm glad that you did, and I hope other people are too.
I hope they do too.
Okay.
But
With that, folks, I have to wrap up the show tonight. Carl, we could talk for hours and hours, and I would enjoy it. And our
Thank you.
viewers deserve to hear it and see it. I want everyone to know about the book, My First Encounter with an Angel, Revelations of Ancient Wisdom. Call the number at the end of the show, 443-3201, to obtain the book on an honor system, and then you can send the check afterwards.
Right.
I'd like to thank our viewers tonight. I'd like to thank Reverend Carl Hewitt for being here.
Thank you.
And don't forget to check in to the website, or actually the email address, the website's not ready yet, at making_known@yahoo.com if you have any questions or things you'd like to hear discussed on the show. And be well until next time.